I should have seen it coming, but you never do when you're in it, right? My girlfriend looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're just a friend who pays the bills." Not during a fight, not emotional. Just said it like it was already settled. And that's when I realized I had been showing up as something she no longer saw me as. We'd been living together for over a year, sharing rent, expenses, and what I believed was a committed relationship. The apartment was ours, decorated with compromises, filled with routines we'd built together, grounded in what I thought was mutual investment in a future. Then, one Tuesday evening, sitting on the couch we'd picked out together, she delivered that statement with the same tone someone uses to mention they're out of milk. No build-up, no warning, just a redefinition that landed like a door closing quietly in another room. I didn't respond immediately because my brain was still catching up to what she'd said. The TV played something neither of us was watching. The kitchen light hummed the way it always did. Everything looked exactly the same, but the air between us had fundamentally changed in a single sentence. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from: Canada, Barbados, Guyana, Kenya, the United States, or the United Kingdom. I want to know. Let's continue. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her to explain or take it back. Something about the way she said it made me understand that this wasn't an invitation to discussion. It was a notification. She'd already decided, probably before sitting down, possibly even before that day. Asking why, or when did this happen, felt pointless because the answer was already embedded in her tone. This was final. I sat there running through recent weeks, trying to identify the moment things shifted without me noticing. Had I missed signs? Stopped doing something important? Failed some tests I didn't know I was taking? But nothing obvious surfaced, which made it worse somehow. If I messed up clearly, I could have pointed to it, understood it, maybe even fixed it. Instead, I was left with the possibility that she'd simply changed her mind about what I was to her. And there was nothing to repair because in her view, nothing was broken, just reclassified. I went to bed that night in the same room, same bed, but lying there felt different. She fell asleep quickly like the conversation had relieved some burden she'd been carrying. I stayed awake wondering if I was supposed to leave, supposed to fight for something she'd already declared over, or supposed to just accept this new reality she'd drawn without my input. By morning, I made a decision. If she saw me as a friend who paid bills, then that's exactly what I would be. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. She defined a relationship's boundaries, and I would respect them completely. No more romantic gestures. No more couple assumptions. No more planning around us as a unit with a shared future. I wouldn't announce this shift because that would imply I was punishing her, and I wasn't. I was simply aligning my behavior with her stated reality. She wanted friendship with financial contribution? Fine. That's precisely what she'd get, with all the emotional distance that arrangement implied. I started that morning by making coffee only for myself. Small thing, but for over a year, I'd made 2 cups automatically. She noticed, glancing at the single mug on the counter, but didn't comment. I didn't explain. Throughout breakfast, I responded to her small talk politely, but without the investment I used to bring. When she mentioned her day's plans, I nodded instead of asking follow-up questions. When she asked about mine, I answered briefly without elaborating. The shift was subtle enough that it could have been mistaken for a bad mood, but it wasn't temporary, and I wasn't waiting for it to pass. This was the new baseline, and I felt strangely calm about it. Separating finances became the first concrete action. I created a shared spreadsheet for rent and utilities, splitting everything exactly in half. When we went grocery shopping that weekend, I kept my items separate from hers at checkout. She looked confused when I didn't just pay for everything like usual, but I explained calmly that friends split costs evenly, and she'd been clear about what we were. She didn't argue, just pulled out her card with an expression I couldn't quite read. Over the next week, I stopped covering her portion when she was short on cash. Previously, I'd wave it off, telling her to get me back whenever. Now I sent payment requests through our banking app, itemized and prompt. She paid them without comment, but I noticed her checking her phone with increasing frequency, like she was waiting for me to say this was just a phase. It wasn't. Every transaction reinforced the boundary she'd established. Friends don't subsidize each other's lives. Friends don't cover costs out of love. Friends maintain balanced ledgers because there's no deeper obligation binding them. I was simply being the most consistent friend who pays bills she could have asked for, and the precision of it seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. The small routines dissolved next, the ones we'd never discussed but had fallen into naturally. I stopped cooking dinner for two. If I made something, I made one portion, ate it, and cleaned only my dishes. She'd come home to find me finishing a meal with no plate set out for her, and the first few times, she asked if I'd made enough to share. I hadn't. She started ordering takeout more frequently, eating alone at the counter while I read in the living room. I stopped asking about her day with any real investment. How was work? Became a courtesy question I'd ask any roommate. And when she answered, I'd nod politely without the follow-up questions that used to show I cared about the details of her life. Weekend plans stopped being collaborative. I'd make my own without checking if she wanted to join, and when she asked what I was doing, I'd tell her in the same tone I'd tell an acquaintance. Informative, but not invitational. The apartment filled with a new kind of silence, not hostile or tense, just transactional. We existed in the same space like coworkers sharing an office, polite and functional, but the warmth that had made a home was gone. She didn't confront the change directly, and neither did I. But I could feel her watching me, trying to figure out if this was temporary or if I'd actually taken her at her word. Then I overheard the phone call. She was in the bedroom with the door mostly closed, talking to someone I assumed was a friend. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was walking past to grab something from the closet, but her laugh stopped me. I finally set boundaries, she was saying, voice light and satisfied. I told him exactly what this is, and honestly, it's so much easier now. No more pressure about the future, no more expectations I couldn't meet. He accepted it, and things are way less complicated. There was a pause while the other person responded, then she continued. I know, right? I was worried he'd make it dramatic, but he's been totally fine with it. I think he gets it now. My hand was still on the doorframe. She'd been planning this. Not just the statement, but the entire redefinition, discussing it with friends while I'd been living in what I thought was a mutual relationship. The conversation revealed this wasn't a spontaneous moment of honesty. It was a calculated shift she'd workshopped with other people before delivering it to me. She'd expected me to accept it and continue providing exactly what I'd been providing, just without the title or the emotional obligations on her end. I stepped back from the door quietly and returned to the living room, but something hardened in my chest. She thought this was working in her favor. She had no idea what accepting her boundaries actually meant. The realization settled in over the following days. She'd wanted control, not honesty. She wanted to keep the comfortable parts of my presence, the split rent, the reliable person in the apartment, the convenience of shared domestic life, while shedding the parts that required her emotional investment or commitment. In her mind, she'd found the perfect arrangement, all benefit, no obligation. She expected me to absorb the demotion quietly and continue showing up as I had before, just without calling it a relationship. The more I sat with that understanding, the clearer my path became. If she wanted a friend who pays bills, she'd get exactly that, stripped of every single thing that had made us more. No more thoughtful gestures. No more going out my way. No more prioritizing her comfort or happiness above my own convenience. Friends don't do that. Friends maintain boundaries, keep things equal, and don't sacrifice for each other beyond basic decency. I've been angry when I first heard her statement, but now I felt something colder and more useful. Clarity. She'd drawn the map. I was just following it with absolute precision. And if the destination wasn't what she'd pictured when she started this, that wasn't my problem to solve anymore. I channeled everything into consistency. Every single action now reflected the friend who pays bills framework, no exceptions. When I did laundry, I did mine only. Her clothes piled up in the hamper, and when she asked if I was doing a load, I said yes, my load. She could do hers whenever she wanted. I stopped picking up items she mentioned needing when I was out. Previously, if she said she was running low on something, I'd grab it without thinking. Now, I'd come home with only my stuff, and when she noticed, I'd remind her that she could get whatever she needed on her own schedule. I stopped adjusting my plans around hers. If I wanted to watch something, I watched it, even if she'd mentioned wanting the TV. If I wanted the apartment quiet, I didn't check if she had friends coming over. I just made my preference known like any roommate would. Every choice felt like laying another brick in a wall that was slowly dividing the apartment into two separate lives that just happened to share an address. She noticed. I could see it in the way she'd pause when I'd walk past her without the casual touch I used to offer, or the way her expression would tighten when I'd make plans without mentioning her. But she didn't say anything directly, and neither did I. We were both living in the reality she'd created, and I was determined to see exactly where it led. 2 weeks passed like this before she finally broke. I was reading on the couch when she came and sat across from me, arms crossed. "Why have you been so distant?" she asked, and the question felt absurd enough that I actually looked up from my book. Distant, as if I'd changed something unilaterally, as if the distance hadn't been her idea from the start. I closed the book and met her eyes. "I'm not being distant," I said calmly. "I'm being exactly what you said I was. A friend who pays bills. That's what friends do. They're polite, they split costs, they respect each other's space. I'm just respecting the boundaries you set." Her face shifted through several expressions, landing somewhere between frustration and confusion. "That's not what I meant," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I tilted my head slightly. "Then what did you mean when you said I wasn't your boyfriend anymore?" The silence stretched. She didn't have an answer that wouldn't contradict her original statement, and we both knew it. Finally, she stood up. "You're being petty," she said, voice tight. I didn't respond. I just opened my book again. Petty implied I was punishing her for something. I wasn't. I was simply giving her exactly what she'd asked for, and if that felt like punishment, maybe she should have thought harder about what she was actually asking for. That night, everything shifted again. I was getting ready for bed when she came into the room, her body language different, softer, more deliberate. She moved close, hand reaching for my arm in a way that used to be familiar, intimate. I understood immediately what she was attempting, and something in me went still. I gently stepped back, putting space between us. "What are you doing?" I asked quietly. She looked confused, then frustrated. "What do you mean, what am I doing? We live together." She trailed off, and I filled the silence. "Friends who share bills don't do that," I said, keeping my voice even. "You were really clear about what we are. I'm just respecting it." Her expression went from confusion to something harder. "Are you serious right now?" I was. Completely. "You can't redefine us one way when it's convenient and another way when you want something different. You told me what I am to you. I believed you." I moved past her to grab a pillow. "I'll sleep on the couch." I didn't wait for her response. As I settled onto the couch that night, I heard her door close harder than necessary. For the first time since her original statement, I think she was starting to understand what she'd actually done. She'd wanted to have it both ways, the freedom to call us friends while keeping the benefits of a relationship. But you don't get both. You get what you choose, and she'd chosen. Now she was living in it. The arguments started after that. She'd confront me in the kitchen, in the living room, anywhere she could corner me into a conversation I didn't want to have. "You're punishing me for being honest," she'd say, voice rising. I'd stay calm, which seemed to make her angrier. "I'm not punishing you. I'm honoring the boundary you set. If that feels like punishment, maybe you should ask yourself why." She'd accuse me of being cold, of changing, of not being the person she'd moved in with. The irony wasn't lost on me. "You're right," I'd say. "I'm not being the boyfriend you moved in with. Because you told me I'm not your boyfriend. I'm being the friend you said I was." Every conversation circled back to the same point. She wanted me to accept the redefinition while continuing to behave like nothing had changed. She wanted the label removed, but the relationship to stay intact. And when I refused to live in that contradiction, when I made the reality match the words, she couldn't handle it. The more she pushed, the more I reinforced my position. This wasn't negotiable. She'd made a choice, and choices have consequences. I wasn't being cruel. I was being consistent. And consistency, I was learning, was far more powerful than anger. Then I found the messages. I wasn't snooping. Her laptop was open on the counter, and a notification popped up while I was walking past. The name wasn't one I recognized, and the preview was just suggestive enough to make me stop. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that even as my hand reached for the touchpad. But I did, and there they were. Months of messages with someone else. Not quite physical cheating, but emotional intimacy that explained everything. Late-night conversations about feelings and futures. Complaints about feeling stuck in a relationship that had run its course. Discussions about what she really wanted versus what she'd settled for. And there, about 3 weeks before her statement to me, a message where she told this person she was going to create some space but couldn't afford to blow everything up until she figured things out. The statement to me wasn't honesty. It was strategy. She'd wanted to keep me around as financial and domestic stability while she explored whatever this other thing was. The friend who pays bills redefinition was her attempt to have everything. The security I provided and the freedom to pursue someone else without technically cheating. I screenshotted the relevant messages and sent them to myself. Then I closed the laptop and went back to what I'd been doing. I didn't confront her. What would be the point? She'd already told me what I was to her. These messages just explained the why behind it. Having the messages changed something in me. Before, I've been operating on principle. She'd set a boundary, and I was respecting it. Now I understood the full picture. This wasn't about her needing space or clarity. It was calculated. She'd wanted to restructure our arrangement to serve her interests while I remained conveniently in place, unaware of the full story. The anger I'd been holding at a simmer went cold and purposeful. I continued the separation with even more precision. Not because I wanted revenge, but because staying in this apartment, in this arrangement, had become intolerable now that I knew the truth. I started looking for my own place. Not frantically, but methodically. I searched listings, calculated what I could afford alone, and began seriously planning an exit that would sever this completely. She noticed me on my laptop more, noticed I was distracted, but she didn't ask what I was doing. Maybe she thought I was giving her the distance she'd asked for. Maybe she was relieved. Either way, I wasn't about to explain that I was actively planning my departure from her life, not just the relationship. Friends can stop being roommates when the arrangement stops working. And this arrangement had stopped working the moment she tried to redefine it. I found a place. 1 bedroom. Affordable. Available in 3 weeks. I put down a deposit without telling her. That evening, she came home to find me browsing furniture websites, looking at what I'd need for a solo apartment. "What are you doing?" she asked, and for the first time in days, there was real panic in her voice. I looked up calmly. "Looking for furniture. I'm moving out." The color drained from her face. "What? Why?" I almost laughed at the question. Because friends who pay bills don't stay bound to a lease when the arrangement stops working. "You said that's what we are, so I'm finding my own place." She sat down hard on the chair across from me. "You're not serious." But I was. Completely. I showed her the lease I'd signed digitally that afternoon. Her hand shook as she scrolled through it. "You can't just leave," she said, voice breaking. "We have a lease together." I nodded. "My name's already off it. I contacted the landlord last week. You'll need to cover the full amount or find a roommate." The panic in her eyes intensified. "I can't afford this place alone." I closed my laptop. "That's something you'll need to figure out. I'll be out by the end of the month." She stared at me like I'd become someone she didn't recognize. Maybe I had. Maybe that's what happens when someone redefines you without your consent. You start redefining yourself in ways they didn't anticipate. She tried every angle over the next hour. First anger. "You're really going to screw me over like this?" I reminded her that friends aren't obligated to subsidize each other's living situations indefinitely. Then desperation. "I didn't mean it the way you took it. I just needed some space, but I didn't want you to leave." I asked her directly what she did mean, and she couldn't articulate it without contradicting herself. Then bargaining. "What if we go to couples counseling? Work through this?" I shook my head. You don't go to couples counseling with a friend who pays bills. You just find separate living arrangements when it's not working. The logic was airtight, built entirely on her own framework, and she had no response that didn't involve admitting she'd wanted something contradictory and unfair. Finally, she just sat there, silent, staring at the floor. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. I believe she thought that was true, but the mistake wasn't the statement itself. It was assuming I'd accept that emotion and continue providing everything she'd grown comfortable with. She'd gambled that I cared enough to stay regardless of how she labeled us, and she'd lost. Now she was facing the consequences of her own words, and there was nothing I could do to save her from them, even if I wanted to, which I didn't. 2 days later, her parents called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her father's voice was stern. "We need to talk about what's going on with you and Sarah." I leaned back against the counter. "What did she tell you?" There was a pause. "She said you become distant and cold for no reason, that you're suddenly moving out and leaving her in a difficult position." I'd expected this. "Did she tell you what she said to me 3 weeks ago?" Another pause. "What do you mean?" I explained, calmly and without embellishment, exactly what she'd said and how I'd responded. I told them about the friend who pays bills statement, about my decision to respect that boundary completely, and about how my consistency had apparently become a problem when she realized what it actually meant. The silence on the other end was long. Finally, her mother spoke. She didn't mention that part. I wasn't surprised. I'm not trying to make this harder for her. I'm just not going to be something she's already said I'm not. If that creates problems for her, those are problems she created. They suggested couples counseling. I gave them the same answer I'd given her. You don't go to couples counseling with a friend who shares bills. You just find new living arrangements. They couldn't argue with that logic, and the call ended shortly after. I wondered if they'd confront her about the full story. Probably, but that wasn't my concern anymore. Sarah oscillated wildly over the next week. Some days she'd be furious, slamming doors and making pointed comments about how I was throwing everything away over nothing. Other days she'd be conciliatory, suggesting we start fresh and forget the whole thing happened. But I couldn't forget, and more importantly, I didn't want to start fresh. Fresh implied going back to what we had before, and what we'd had before was apparently something she'd already been unhappy with for months while I remained unaware. The messages I'd found proved she'd been mentally checked out long before her statement. The only thing that had changed was that now I knew. One evening, she sat down next to me and tried a different approach. "I miss us," she said softly. "Don't you miss what we had?" I thought about that honestly. I miss what I thought we had, but that apparently wasn't real. What was real was you feeling stuck and complaining about me to someone else while I kept showing up every day thinking we were building something. She flinched. "You read my messages." I didn't deny it. I did, and they explained everything I needed to know. She started to defend herself, but I held up a hand. "It doesn't matter anymore. You wanted something different. Now you're getting it. We're both getting it." As the moving date approached, Sarah's desperation intensified. She'd vacillate between trying to convince me to stay and lashing out when that didn't work. "You're going to regret this," she'd say 1 minute. Then, "Please, can we just talk about this like adults?" the next. But every conversation circled back to the same incompatible wants. She wanted me to stay, keep paying half the rent, keeping a presence in her life, but without calling a relationship or expecting commitment from her. She wanted the arrangement without the label, the benefits without the obligations. And when I refused to accept that contradiction, when I insisted that actions and words actually align, she had no framework to argue from. I'd packed most of my things over 2 weeks, slowly emptying my presence from the apartment. Each box felt like shedding weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Some friends reached out during this time, having heard various versions of what was happening. I didn't badmouth her to them. I just explained simply. She told me what I was to her. I accepted it, and I'm acting accordingly. Some understood. Some thought I was being harsh. I stopped caring which camp people fell into. This wasn't about winning social approval. It was about refusing to live in a reality where my role was whatever was most convenient for someone else at any given moment. I scheduled the move for Saturday. Friends offered to help, people who'd heard my side and understood why I was leaving. The night before, Sarah tried one last time. She came into the living room where I was finishing packing, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want you to go," she said, voice breaking. "I know I messed up. I know I said the wrong thing. But can't we move past this?" I stopped packing and looked at her directly. "Let me ask you something. If I stayed, if I unpacked all of this and we pretended the last month didn't happen, what would you introduce me as to people you meet?" She hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Your boyfriend? She finally offered, but it came out as a question, uncertain and conditional. I shook my head. See, that's the problem. You still don't know what you want from me. You just know you don't want the inconvenience of me leaving. But that's not enough to build anything on. I went back to packing. She stood there for a few more minutes, then went to her room. I heard the door close quietly. The conversation was over, and so were we. Tomorrow, I'd be gone, and she'd have to figure out what came next without me as a safety net. The morning of the move, I got a text from Marcus, a mutual friend. Need to tell you something. Sarah's been telling people you became financially controlling and manipulative, that you're forcing her out of the apartment. Thought you should know what's being said. I stared at the message. Of course she had. When the truth didn't paint her favorably, she'd rewritten the narrative to protect her image. I texted back, appreciate the heads up. You heard my side. Marcus, yeah. And it doesn't match what she's saying at all. That's why I'm telling you. Others might not know the full story. I thanked him and pocketed my phone. I wasn't going to defend myself publicly. I wasn't going to engage in a social media battle over who was right. The people who mattered to me knew the truth. The rest could believe whatever version made them comfortable. My truck arrived, and friends started loading boxes. Sarah stayed in her bedroom, door closed, music playing loud enough to signal she wasn't coming out. Fine. I didn't need a goodbye scene. By noon, the apartment was cleared of everything that was mine. I did one final walkthrough, checking closets and cabinets. The space already looked different, emptier, like a place I'd visited once, but never actually lived. I left my key on the counter and walked out. Some friends distanced themselves after the move. I noticed it in the group chats that went quiet when I joined, the invitations that stopped coming. Sarah had apparently gotten to them first, and they'd chosen to believe her version. Others reached out privately, wanting to hear my side. I told them the same story I'd been living. She redefined us, I accepted it, and I adjusted accordingly. Most understood once they heard it plainly. A few still thought I should have fought for the relationship or tried harder to understand what she really meant. I didn't argue with them. You can't convince someone who's determined to see you as the villain. What interested me more was how quickly I stopped caring about the social fallout. A month ago, the idea of losing friends over this would have devastated me. Now it felt like necessary shedding. Anyone who could hear the full story and still think I'd been unreasonable wasn't someone I needed in my life anyway. I declined invitations where she'd be present, not out of bitterness, but because there was no point in forcing proximity. We weren't friends. We'd never actually been friends. We'd been two people in a relationship where one person wanted out but didn't want to lose the benefits, and the other person refused to accept that arrangement. Simple as that. 3 days after the move, Sarah called. I almost didn't answer, but figured she deserved one last conversation. Hey, she said, voice small. Can we talk? I put her on speaker and continued unpacking my new place. We're talking. There was a long pause. I hate how things ended, she said. I hate that you think I'm this terrible person who used you. I didn't think she was terrible. I thought she was human and selfish and confused about what she wanted. I don't think you're terrible. I just think you wanted things that were incompatible, and you try to make them compatible by changing what I was to you without my input. She started crying. I made a mistake. I should never have said what I said. Can we try again? Start over. I stopped unpacking. Sarah, if I came back right now, what would be different? Silence. I'd appreciate you more. I'd be clearer about what I want. And what do you want? I asked. Another long silence. I want us to work, she finally said. That's not an answer. That's a wish. What I need to know is, if I came back, would you introduce me as your boyfriend or your friend? The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. I don't know, she whispered. Then there's nothing to come back to, I said gently. I'm not going to be in limbo while you figure it out. Before hanging up, I asked her one more direct question. If I stayed and we went back to how things were, would you have told the person you were messaging that you'd chosen me? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was barely audible. I don't know. Maybe. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. And there it was. The absolute confirmation that her request for me to stay wasn't about wanting me. It was about not wanting to lose the stability and convenience my presence provided. She hadn't thought far ahead because she'd wanted to keep all her options open indefinitely. Me as the safe, reliable presence. Them as the exciting possibility. Her having both without committing to either. That's what I thought, I said. I'm not angry at you, but I'm not coming back either. Take care of yourself. I hung up before she could respond. There was nothing left to say. The relationship had ended the moment she redefined it. Everything since then had just been me recognizing what she'd already decided and refusing to pretend otherwise. Some people need to lose something completely before they understand what they had. But by the time they figure out, it's too late. And this was too late. I'd moved on, not to spite her, but because staying would have meant accepting that I was only worth keeping around when convenient. And I decided I was worth more than that. While unpacking books in my new place, I found something that must have gotten mixed into my boxes. Her journal. I should have boxed it back up and dropped it at her place. Instead, I opened it. The entry was from 4 months ago. I feel trapped. He's great on paper, responsible, kind, reliable. But I don't feel the excitement anymore. I can't afford this place alone, though. And he'd be devastated if I ended things. Maybe if I just create some distance, I can figure out what I actually want without blowing everything up. I read it 3 times. The statement she'd made to me wasn't impulsive emotion or a need for honesty. It was a calculated attempt to have her cake and eat it too. She'd wanted to keep the financial security and domestic stability I provided while creating emotional space to explore whatever else she thought she was missing. The friend who pays bills framework was her solution to feeling trapped. Keep me around and function while releasing herself from obligation and feeling. I photographed the page and texted it to her with one line. Found this in my stuff. Explains a lot. I'll drop the journal at your parents' place. She read it immediately. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Sorry didn't change what had happened. It just confirmed that every choice I'd made since her original statement had been the right one. Reading her written thoughts provided strange closure. This wasn't about something I'd done wrong or failed to provide emotionally. She constructed a situation where she could keep benefits while shedding obligations, and my refusal to accept that arrangement had disrupted her entire plan. She'd wanted control over the relationship's definition without accepting the consequences of that definition. She'd wanted me to continue acting like a committed partner while she treated commitment as optional. And when I'd taken her at her word and adjusted everything, finances, behavior, expectations, living arrangements, the reality of what she'd asked for had become unbearable to her. Not because she loved me, but because she'd lost the arrangement that served her interests. I felt no satisfaction in this realization, just a quiet confirmation that leaving had been necessary. Some people view relationships as resources to be managed rather than commitments to be honored. And once you realize someone sees you that way, the only healthy response is to extract yourself completely. No anger, no revenge, just clear-eyed recognition followed by decisive action. I finished unpacking that night. My new apartment was smaller, quieter, entirely mine. No one was going to redefine me here. No one was going to keep me around for convenience while withholding commitment. I'd rather be alone than be someone's backup plan. Move-out day had come and gone 3 weeks ago. Friends had helped me load boxes while Sarah stayed in the bedroom. Door closed, music playing loud enough to make her absence official. I didn't knock, didn't say goodbye, just did the final walkthrough. Check closets, cabinets, that weird storage space behind the bathroom door we'd never really used. The apartment looked different already, emptier in ways that had nothing to do with missing furniture. It looked like a space I'd visited once, but never actually lived in, like the memories had already started fading from the walls. I left the key on the kitchen counter next to a folder containing my half of the final utility bills already paid. No note, no explanation. She had my number if there was anything that needed clarifying, but I suspected there wouldn't be. Everything that needed to be said had been said, and everything that needed to be understood had either been understood or never would be. I pulled the door closed behind me, heard the lock click, and walked to the truck where a friend were waiting. Someone asked if I was okay. I was. More okay than I'd been in months, actually. Sometimes the right decision doesn't feel triumphant. It just feels clear. And this felt clear. 2 days in my new place, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. I expected apologies or anger, maybe another attempt at reconciliation. Instead, I can't afford the apartment alone. I need you to keep paying your half until I find a roommate. It's only fair since you're the one who decided to leave. I read it twice, then set the phone down and laughed. Actually laughed. The audacity was almost impressive. She wanted me to continue being the friend who pays bills, even after I'd moved out, even after I'd explicitly ended the arrangement, even after she'd spent weeks telling people I was controlling and manipulative. She wanted me to subsidize her life indefinitely while contributing nothing in return, not even basic respect. I picked up the phone and typed, "My lease obligation ended when my name came off the lease. You'll need to figure out the apartment situation on your own. Good luck." She responded immediately. "Are you serious? You're really going to leave me stranded like this?" I typed back, "You told me I was just a friend who paid bills. Friends don't have ongoing financial obligations to each other after they stop living together. You defined what we were. I'm just being consistent." She sent 3 more messages. Anger, then pleading, then more anger. I didn't respond to any of them. Then I blocked her number. Not out of spite, but out of completion. There was nothing left to say. Over the next month, I heard updates through mutual friends. Sarah had tried to cover the rent alone for a few weeks, but couldn't sustain it. She'd searched for roommates, but couldn't find anyone willing to move in quickly enough. Eventually, she'd had to break the lease and move back in with her parents. The person she'd been messaging, the one whose conversations had explained her whole redefinition strategy, apparently wasn't interested in stepping into the relationship role now that I was gone. According to Marcus, she'd reached out to them after I moved out, tried to convert the emotional connection into something more substantial, but they declined. They'd enjoyed the attention and the validation, but hadn't actually wanted the commitment she was suddenly offering. So she'd lost both the stability I'd provided and the exciting possibility she'd been pursuing. The friends who believed her initial narrative started hearing my side as more people compared stories. Some reached out to apologize for distancing themselves. I appreciated the gesture, but didn't feel any pressing need to rebuild those friendships. They'd show me who they were when they chose to believe rumors without asking questions. I wasn't angry about it, but I also wasn't interested in pretending it hadn't happened. My new routine settled in quickly. Smaller apartment, lower rent, complete autonomy over every decision. I cooked what I wanted, watched what I wanted, kept the space however I wanted. No negotiations, no accommodations, no wondering if someone else was happy with the arrangement. Just me, figuring out what my life looked like when I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's framework. Friends asked if I was dating. I wasn't. Not because I was heartbroken or avoiding relationships, but because I was genuinely enjoying the clarity of single life after months of confusion. There's something valuable about time alone after a relationship ends badly. It lets you remember who you are outside of someone else's expectations or redefinitions. I'd spent over a year being a boyfriend, then a month being redefined as something else entirely, and now I was just myself. No role, no label, just me, making choices that serve my interests without worrying if they conflicted with someone else's unstated agenda. Occasionally, I'd think about Sarah and wonder if she'd learned anything from what happened. Probably not. People rarely learn from consequences they believe were inflicted rather than earned. She likely still saw me as the person who abandoned her rather than the person who accepted her own stated boundaries. And that was fine. I didn't need her to understand. I just needed to be free of the situation. Looking back now, I don't feel victorious or vindicated. I just feel clear. She told me exactly what I was to her, a friend who paid bills, not a boyfriend anymore. And I believed her. The consequence wasn't punishment or revenge. It was just the natural outcome of her own redefinition. When you tell someone they're not what they thought they were to you, you can't be surprised when they stop acting like they are. When you try to restructure a relationship to serve only your interests, you can't be upset when the other person decides not to participate in that structure. When you want all the benefits without the obligations, you can't expect the other person to subsidize your comfort indefinitely. She'd wanted control over the relationship's definition without accepting what that definition actually meant. She wanted to call us friends while I continued behaving like a partner. And when I refused that contradiction, when I made the reality match the words, everything fell apart. Not because I was cruel, but because what she'd been asking for was fundamentally unsustainable. Some people learn too late that you can't have it both ways. That words mean things, and choices have consequences. I'd simply stopped trying to be something she'd already decided I wasn't. And that decision, that simple act of believing what she told me and adjusting accordingly, had changed both of our lives permanently. I don't regret it, not even a little. Thank you for staying with me through this.